There's something strange about hearing your own name called at a restaurant when you never made a reservation. That was my first sign. I was standing in the foyer of Clara's, an upscale, moody little place tucked beneath an old library in downtown Charleston. I hadn't been there in years. Not since Rena and I celebrated our 5th anniversary. But that night, after a truly miserable day at work, I found myself walking there without any plan. No text, no call, no intention, just instinct. Reservation for Emory, the hostess called. That's my name. I didn't answer her. Not yet. I watched her glance around, confused, clutching the tablet. She called it again. Louder. Emory Pellman. I hadn't made any reservation, but my feet started walking toward her before my brain could argue. And I just said, "Yes, that's me." She smiled, clearly relieved, and gestured toward the back dining area. "This way, sir. Your party has already arrived." My heart kicked once, and then twice. I didn't know what I was walking toward. I had no party, but I followed her through the warm, candle-lit maze of tables, past clinking forks and murmured conversations, until we turned the corner near the tall windows facing the street. That's when I saw her. Rena, my wife of 11 years. She was laughing in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. Sitting across from her, arms relaxed, was a man I didn't recognize. He wasn't someone from her job. He wasn't someone from church. And he sure as hell wasn't Hannah. He was younger, maybe 30, polished, smug, the kind of smug you can smell. And they weren't sitting across like colleagues. Their knees were touching. He had his hand on hers. And Rena, my wife, didn't pull away. The hostess stopped. "Here you go, Mr. Pellman." They both turned. Rena's eyes caught mine, and her face changed. Not in guilt, not in panic, in shock. Like a ghost had walked in and sat down. I walked the remaining few steps without saying a word. My hands weren't shaking. My voice wasn't rising. The air was cold around me, but my skin felt like fire. Then I did something I didn't know I had the strength to do. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my wedding ring, and placed it gently between the salt and pepper shakers. It clinked louder than it should have. Even the waiter nearby paused. Rena's lips parted, but she didn't speak. Neither did I. I just walked out of the restaurant, and the door behind me didn't swing. It slammed. The street outside was slick with a light drizzle, the kind that makes you think the world is trying to cry for you when you can't find your own tears. I walked past the windows of Clara's, knowing full well they could still see me. And I didn't care. I didn't rush. I didn't look back. I was daring her to follow, hoping maybe she would, praying, even. But she didn't. I turned the corner, slipped into the alley near the parking lot, and leaned against the wall like my knees had finally admitted what my heart already knew. I had just walked out of my marriage. No yelling, no fight, just a moment and a ring. I stood there for maybe 15 minutes, long enough for two couples to pass by, holding hands, whispering, laughing. I hated them for that. Hated how normal they looked. How untouched. How lucky. I checked my phone. Nothing. No missed call. No text. No wait, or please, or it's not what it looked like. Just silence. The kind of silence that grows fangs. By the time I got in my car, I felt nauseous. I sat in the driver's seat, stared through the windshield, and remembered the last time Rena and I had eaten at that same restaurant. It was our 5th anniversary. She wore a green dress, the one with the lace around the sleeves. She had smiled at me then. I remembered how the candlelight flickered against her cheekbone, how she tucked her hand under my chin and said, "You always look at me like I'm your forever." That woman, she wasn't the same person I saw tonight. I don't know who I saw tonight. I don't know what that man meant to her, but I know what her silence meant to me. I finally started the car, drove aimlessly for nearly an hour, passed by our old high school, the gym where I first asked her out, the gas station where we used to meet when our parents didn't know we were sneaking out. Those memories didn't feel warm anymore. They felt infected. When I pulled into our driveway later that night, the house was still dark. Her car wasn't there. I stood on the porch for a long while before unlocking the door. The living room was exactly how I left it. Dim, quiet, clean. Too clean. I went to the kitchen, opened a drawer, and pulled out the old shoebox I hadn't touched in years. It held all the things I couldn't throw away: movie stubs, handwritten notes, a photo of us in a photo booth from Myrtle Beach. I flipped through them like I was reading a novel I no longer believed in. Then I saw it, a letter she'd written me during our 2nd year of marriage. It said, "If you ever think I've stopped loving you, Just ask me to look you in the eye and say it. So I said it aloud. Rena, do you love me? But there was no one there to answer. Just me. In the shoebox. And the sound of the rain finally starting to fall harder outside. The next morning felt like waking up on the floor of a house that had burned down while you slept. You're still alive, but nothing around you feels real anymore. I hadn't even gone to bed, technically. I dozed off on the couch with my shoes still on and the television flickering static because I didn't bother changing the input from the HDMI. There was a moment, just a split second, when I forgot what had happened. I woke up thinking about work, about the deadline for that packaging design project I was supposed to finalize. I even reached for my phone to check the time. And that's when the weight came crashing back down on my chest. The restaurant. The man. The hand-holding. The ring. And the silence. Still no message from Rena. Not a single one. I didn't want to eat. I didn't want to shower. I didn't want to feel anything. But around noon, I heard her car pull into the driveway. My stomach twisted in on itself like a rubber band being overstretched. I waited for the sound of her keys. The door. She came in slowly. Quietly. Like someone walking through a stranger's home. Not like she lived here. Not like she belonged anymore. When she saw me sitting at the kitchen table, she froze. She didn't say my name. She didn't cry. She didn't even look surprised that I was there. Instead, she said, I was going to text you. I nodded. Not because I believed her, but because I didn't want to interrupt. I wanted to see what else she was willing to say. Rena walked to the fridge, opened it, stared inside for a full minute like she had forgotten why she'd come home, and then shut it again. Finally, she said, I didn't expect you to be there last night. I didn't say anything. She sat down across from me. The same seat she always took. The one with the small chip on the side of the table where she used to rest her elbow while scrolling through recipes she never made. She looked tired. Hair still curled from the night before. Makeup mostly faded, but not all of it. I could still see the outline of eyeliner beneath her lashes. I need to explain, she said, but there was no conviction in her voice. It sounded rehearsed. Hollow. Like she knew there was no explanation I'd accept, so she didn't bother putting much effort into it. I didn't ask who he was. I didn't have to. She said his name anyway. His name is Benton. We met at the conference last spring. I stared at the wood grain in the table. I didn't mean for it to happen, she added quickly, almost defensively. It just did. That line. It just happened. As if her body accidentally fell into his. As if late-night texts, private dinners, and the hotel receipts I'd eventually discover were all acts of clumsiness. Still, I stayed calm. Too calm. I think that scared her more than if I'd screamed. She pushed her phone toward me across the table. Here, she said. You can read everything. I didn't delete anything. I didn't touch it. She nudged it again. Seriously. I want you to. So I picked it up. And I wished I hadn't. It started 6 months ago. That's when the messages first got personal. He complimented her hair. Her voice. Said he liked the way she laughed when she was nervous. She told him about how lonely she felt. How unseen she was at home. How I had stopped surprising her. Stopped making her feel special. That's the thing about betrayal. It always comes wrapped in some half-truth. Maybe I had stopped surprising her. Maybe I had been tired from work. Maybe I had become too predictable, too comfortable, too stable. But I never stopped loving her. And not once, not in over 100 messages, did I see her defend me. She never said, my husband is trying. She never said, I'm married. She just leaned into it. Smiled through emojis. Sent selfies and dresses she never wore around me. Then there were the photos. Him. Her. Together at a bar. In front of a hotel room mirror. Her head on his chest, captioned with, wish you didn't have to leave so early. I didn't throw the phone. I just placed it back on the table. Are you in love with him? I asked. Her eyes flickered. That microsecond of hesitation told me everything. I don't know, she whispered. I got up. Walked upstairs. Shut the door to the guest room. And that's where I stayed the rest of the day. Because I knew, if I looked at her one more second, I might break the part of me I was trying so hard to keep together. I didn't sleep that night. Not a real sleep anyway. I just laid there in the dark guest room, staring at the ceiling, counting the slow rotation of the fan blades. Sometimes, I thought I heard her moving around downstairs, maybe checking her phone, maybe pacing the kitchen, but I didn't go to her. I wouldn't be the one to chase. That part of me, the part that used to fight to fix everything, was already starting to wilt away. By 5 a.m., I couldn't pretend anymore. I sat up, swung my legs over the side of the bed, and pressed my palms against my face. I needed air. I needed space that didn't smell like her shampoo or sound like her sighs. I went downstairs, moving as quietly as I could, not because I cared about waking her, but because I hated the thought of seeing her sleepy face, pretending like nothing had happened. In the kitchen, the world looked different in the early light. Harsher. Less forgiving. I made a cup of coffee that tasted like dirt and opened the junk drawer, the one stuffed with bills, batteries, and old birthday cards, looking for a pen and something to write on. That's when I found it. A letter. Folded carefully, tucked beneath a stack of expired coupons and takeout menus. It was addressed to me. My heart stuttered as I opened it. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Rena's. The letter wasn't dated. It wasn't signed. But I knew she'd written it months ago. Emory. I don't know how to say this without sounding ungrateful. You were steady. You were good. You have given me a home, safety, a life I should be endlessly thankful for. But sometimes I wonder if I was meant for something wilder. Something less certain. I hate myself for even thinking it. You deserve more than a restless heart. I read it 3 times before setting it down. She had been planning her exit for months. And still, she stayed. Slept in our bed. Laughed at my stupid jokes. Made pancakes on Sundays like nothing was wrong. I sat back, staring at the letter like it might bite me. I thought about all the nights she kissed me goodnight with that thought lurking in her head, that she wanted something wilder. I wasn't the hurricane she craved. I was the lighthouse. And somehow, that made me the villain in her eyes. I picked up my coffee, poured it straight down the sink, and walked outside barefoot into the backyard. The grass was wet from last night's rain. The sunrise was bleeding into the clouds, trying to find a way to paint something beautiful on a day that didn't deserve it. My neighbor, Mr. Dalton, an old widower who spent most of his mornings trimming his hedges, gave me a small nod over the fence. I nodded back automatically, wondering if he could see it in my face, that hollowed-out look of a man who just realized he had no idea who he married. I stayed outside until the cold bit at my toes. Then I went back in, grabbed a suitcase from the hall closet, and started packing. Not hers. Mine. I didn't want to stay in that house a second longer than I had to. It wasn't home anymore. It was a crime scene with clean sheets. I packed without thinking, without folding neatly. Just necessities, a few shirts, jeans, my work laptop, my shaving kit. I left the wedding album sitting on the nightstand. I couldn't even look at it without feeling like an idiot. As I zipped the suitcase, I heard her footsteps upstairs. I didn't bother calling out. I didn't leave a note. I didn't even take my favorite coffee mug, the one she bought me on our 3rd anniversary with the words, "World's Okayest Husband," in big stupid letters. I walked out the front door and didn't lock it behind me. She could have it all. The house. The memories. The ghost of the man she didn't love anymore. I drove for 2 hours without a destination. I passed towns I didn't recognize, farms with broken fences, gas stations with neon signs buzzing in the morning air. Eventually, I pulled into a cheap motel off Route 64. It looked like the kind of place people disappeared into when they needed to become someone else. The guy at the front desk didn't even blink when I paid cash and took a room key. When I got to the room, I sat on the edge of the bed, stared at the floral comforter, and realized I didn't know what to do next. I had always pictured my life with Rena. Good or bad, rich or poor, boring or thrilling, she was the one constant. And now? I was just a man in a motel room with a half-packed suitcase and a head full of memories he wished he could erase. I thought about calling someone, my brother, my best friend, anyone. But what was I supposed to say? Hey, guess what? Turns out I wasn't enough. No, I couldn't stomach it. I turned my phone off and tossed it onto the nightstand. Then I laid back on the bed, stared at the cracked ceiling, and tried to imagine a future where her laugh didn't echo inside my skull every time I closed my eyes. And for the first time since it all started, I felt something new. Not anger, not heartbreak, but a slow, cold kind of freedom I didn't yet know what to do with. I must have drifted in and out of sleep 100 times that day, each time waking up with that sick, sinking feeling that none of this was a dream. It was my new reality, and no matter how tightly I shut my eyes, it wasn't going anywhere. The motel walls felt like they were breathing with me, a tired old building sagging under the weight of every broken heart that had ever hidden inside it. At some point around sunset, I turned my phone back on. I don't know why. Morbid curiosity, maybe. Or maybe that sliver of hope that somehow she'd realize what she was losing and say the right thing, the one thing that could glue my life back together. I had 12 missed calls from Rena, 3 voicemails, and 1 text message. I didn't listen to the voicemails. I just stared at the text. It was short. Too short for what needed to be said. I'm sorry. Please call me. That was it. No explanation. No apology worth anything. Just two lazy sentences sent out into the void, hoping I'd do the work of mending what she smashed. I put the phone back down without responding. I didn't block her. I didn't scream into the mattress. I didn't do anything dramatic. I just sat there, absorbing the truth I'd been too scared to admit even to myself. The woman I loved, or thought I loved, wasn't fighting for me. She wasn't afraid of losing me. She was afraid of losing her safety net. There's a difference. Around 8 p.m., I left the motel to get some food. There was a diner across the highway, a place called Lila's, the kind of greasy spoon with peeling leather booths and a jukebox that only played sad country songs. Perfect. I sat at the counter, ordered a burger I barely touched, and watched the waitress, a woman probably in her 60s named Margie, refill my coffee every 20 minutes without asking if I wanted it. Bless her for that. I must have looked like hell because Margie finally leaned over the counter and said, "Rough night, honey?" I smiled because it was the first honest thing anyone had said to me in 24 hours. Something like that, I said. She nodded, like she'd seen it 1,000 times before. You want a slice of pie? On the house. It fixes more than you'd think. I didn't want pie. I didn't want anything. But something about the way she offered it, like a mother to a son she didn't even know, made me say yes. As she set the slice down in front of me, I realized something important. Strangers cared more about my pain than the woman who promised to love me forever. It was a quiet kind of heartbreak, not the fireworks and screaming kind you see in movies. Just a slow, persistent ache that made the world seem a little dimmer. When I got back to the motel later that night, the reality of my situation hit even harder. Where was I supposed to go? This wasn't just about leaving a house. It was about leaving an entire life. Every Christmas tradition, every inside joke, every stupid little ritual we built together over a decade, it all felt like it had been erased in one silent conversation across a restaurant table. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally opened the voice messages she left. The first was quiet. I could hear her breathing, hear her trying to find the words, but she never spoke. She just let the line stay open for a minute and then hung up. The second was worse. She was crying. I'm sorry, Emory. I didn't mean for you to find out like that. I didn't mean to hurt you. Please just talk to me. Please. And the third? The third one broke something in me. I'm scared. I didn't think you'd actually leave. Please, don't just disappear. I need you. Not I love you. Not I choose you. Just I need you. There it was, the final nail. She didn't want me. She wanted the version of me that kept her safe, kept her from being alone, kept her from facing the consequences of chasing something wilder. I deleted all 3 messages without saving them. I turned the phone off again. And I sat there in the motel room, realizing that for the first time in my adult life, I had no one to answer to. No one to ask permission from. No one to check in with. It was terrifying. And it was exhilarating. I laid back against the lumpy motel bed, the spring poking me in the back, and I made myself a promise right then, not the kind you make when you're angry, or drunk, or trying to hurt someone. I promised myself that I would not be the man who begged to be chosen. If someone didn't see my worth, I wasn't going to waste my life trying to convince them. They could go, and I would survive. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But someday, I would survive. I drifted off to sleep sometime after midnight, and for the first time since I dropped my wedding ring onto that restaurant table, I didn't dream about her. I didn't dream about anything at all. The next morning, the sun crept in through the motel curtains, lighting up the faded wallpaper and casting everything in that harsh, unforgiving light that makes even ordinary things look like wreckage. I showered in lukewarm water, put on the same jeans and t-shirt from yesterday, and stood in front of the mirror for a long time, studying the man staring back at me. I looked older than I remembered. Not because of the lines around my eyes or the mess of stubble I hadn't bothered shaving. It was something deeper. Like whatever innocence I still had, whatever blind belief I'd clung to, had been stripped away, leaving behind someone harder, someone I wasn't sure I liked yet. I packed my few things into the suitcase and checked out of the motel without a word to the guy at the desk. He didn't ask where I was headed. Maybe he saw it too, that look of a man who didn't know where home was anymore. I ended up driving back into town. Not to see Rena. Not to confront her. But because some part of me, the stubborn, unfinished part, needed to tie off the loose ends. I needed to see the house again, to feel the finality of it. I needed to look at the life I was leaving behind and make peace with it. When I pulled up to the curb, her car was there. For a long minute, I just sat in my truck, engine running, watching the curtains of the living room window twitch like someone had just peeked out. She knew I was here. I killed the engine and stepped out. Every step up the walkway felt heavier than the last. By the time I got to the porch, it felt like my shoes were filled with concrete. I almost turned around, almost got back into my truck and drove off without looking back. But I didn't. I rang the doorbell. The doors swung open almost immediately, like she'd been standing right there. Rena looked different. Not physically, she still had that same soft jawline, the same worried crease between her eyebrows, but the energy about her had shifted. She looked guilty and scared. "Emory," she breathed, like my name itself hurt her to say. I didn't respond. She stepped aside silently, inviting me in. The house smelled like her perfume, the same vanilla scent she used to wear on our date nights. It hit me in the gut, sharp and immediate. Memories tried to swarm me, but I shoved them back. I walked into the living room, every piece of furniture exactly where we left it, yet somehow feeling foreign now, like a museum exhibit of a life that no longer existed. She closed the door gently behind us. "I didn't know if you'd come," she said softly. "I didn't come for you," I answered, and my voice sounded colder than I intended. "I came to get a few things." She flinched, but she didn't argue. I moved past her, went upstairs to the bedroom, and grabbed the rest of what little I needed: important documents, a few photographs that still mattered, an old sweatshirt my mother gave me when I left for college. When I came back down, she was standing in the middle of the living room, wringing her hands together, her wedding ring still glinting under the ceiling fan. She still wore it, but it didn't mean anything anymore. "I messed up," she said suddenly, voice breaking. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I set the box of my things down by the door and turned to face her fully for the first time. "You didn't mean for it to happen, Rena," I said, keeping my voice even. "Maybe not the way it did. Maybe not this fast. But you made choices. You just didn't think I'd ever notice." Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. She stepped closer, reaching out like she wanted to touch me, like she thought she could fix what she shattered with one desperate gesture. "I still love you," she whispered. I shook my head. "No, you don't," I said. "You loved who I used to be. The man who would forgive anything. The man who would carry all the weight so you could feel light." She dropped her hand. "I'm sorry," she said again, but the words were empty now, stripped of their power. I picked up the box and opened the door. She followed me out onto the porch, barefoot, shivering even though it wasn't that cold. As I set the box down in the passenger seat of my truck, I turned to her one last time. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Rena," I said. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, maybe beg me to stay, maybe ask me to forgive her. But I didn't wait to hear it. I got in the truck, slammed the door, and pulled away from the curb without looking back, the sight of her shrinking in my rearview mirror until she was just a small, shaking shadow. As I drove, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was empty. A blank slate. A man finally freed from carrying someone else's idea of who he was supposed to be. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the road ahead of me looked wide open. Wide enough for someone who was finally ready to stop being the safety net, the backup plan, the lighthouse. Wide enough for someone ready to start over. The drive felt endless, even though the next town was only 40 miles away. I didn't play any music. I didn't open the windows. I didn't make phone calls. I just drove, the tires humming against the asphalt like a heartbeat that didn't know whether to race or slow down. Somewhere deep inside me, the part that had always tried to patch holes and smooth edges was finally falling silent. I wasn't thinking about where to stay. I wasn't thinking about what came next. I wasn't even thinking about her. Not anymore. I pulled into a small town called Greystone, the kind of place that had a main street and 3 stoplights, the kind of place where strangers actually waved at you just for existing. I found a cheap little rental cabin at the edge of a wooded park. It wasn't much: a lopsided porch, a fireplace that probably didn't work, furniture that smelled faintly of cedar and dust, but it didn't matter. It was mine for now. And more importantly, it wasn't hers. That night, I sat out on the tiny porch with a battered lawn chair I found inside the cabin, a mug of black coffee cooling on the rail beside me. The stars were out, sharp and clear in the sky. It had been a long time since I noticed stars. When you're busy carrying the weight of a marriage, sometimes you forget there's a whole world outside the walls you built. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. I thought about ignoring it, leaving it in the cabin, letting the night erase whatever desperate thing she might be trying to say. But curiosity is a cruel master. I picked it up. One new message from Rena. I didn't open it immediately. I just stared at the notification for a long time, feeling like it was some kind of final test, one last thread trying to pull me back into the burning house. Finally, I tapped it open. It wasn't a paragraph. It wasn't some desperate plea. It wasn't a photo or a voicemail. It was a single image. A photo of our wedding day. She had cropped it, though. Cropped it so that only her face showed. Only her smile. Only her happiness. I stared at it, numb. There was no apology attached. No explanation. No caption. Just that, her happiness, preserved without me in the frame. And that was when it hit me harder than anything else had since the night at the restaurant. She wasn't mourning me. She was mourning who she was when she was loved without question. When she was adored without conditions. She missed being the center of someone's world, not because she loved me, but because she loved being loved. I sat there with that realization clawing at my chest until it finally tore something loose. I deleted the photo. I didn't reply. I didn't say goodbye. I simply blocked her number. And just like that, the last tether between us snapped. I leaned back in the chair, closed my eyes, and let the night air settle into my skin. The stars didn't mourn with me. The trees didn't bend low with sorrow. The world just kept turning, indifferent and magnificent. I wasn't anyone's safety net anymore. I wasn't anyone's afterthought. I wasn't anyone's fool. The cabin creaked around me, the smell of pine sap heavy in the air, and for the first time since the ring hit the restaurant table, I let myself smile, a small, broken, lopsided smile, but a real one. I wasn't healed yet, not even close. But I wasn't lost anymore either. Tomorrow, I'd start figuring out what came next. Not for her. Not for anyone else. For me. The next morning, I woke up with sunlight pouring through the cracked blinds and birds arguing somewhere out in the trees. For a moment, I lay there, still in yesterday's clothes, letting the warmth soak into my skin, breathing in slow and steady. It was the first time in months that waking up didn't feel like bracing for a punch. No plans. No expectations. No one waiting for me to explain myself. Just air. Just light. Just the small, stubborn beat of a heart that had refused to break, no matter how much it had been tested. I made a list in my head as I showered simple things. Get groceries. Find a real place to live. Maybe get a haircut. Things that didn't seem important when my whole world was wrapped around Rena's moods and silences, but now felt strangely heroic. I drove into town around noon. Greystone was busy in its own sleepy way, kids riding their bikes down the sidewalks, a man outside the hardware store repainting a sign, a woman at a flower stall setting up little bouquets that smelled like spring itself. For the first time, I didn't feel like a ghost passing through. I felt real. Solid. Present. At the grocery store, a little girl bumped into me with her shopping cart, sending a pack of apples rolling across the floor. I knelt down to help her, and her mother rushed over, apologizing with a flustered smile. She was around my age. Maybe a little younger. Light brown hair pulled into a messy bun, freckles dusted across her nose. Her name tag said Callie. She laughed nervously as we both chased down the runaway apples. Sorry about that. She's in a demolition phase, Callie said, her voice warm and easy. No harm done, I said, handing her the last apple. We ended up talking for a few minutes about nothing in particular. The weather. How small towns always had the best apple pies. How kids had more energy than the laws of physics should allow. When I finally said goodbye and pushed my cart toward the checkout, I realized something I hadn't felt in months. I smiled without forcing it. Later that afternoon, I took my groceries back to the cabin, cooked myself a sad little sandwich, and sat on the porch again, watching the world go by at its own slow, stubborn pace. I wasn't magically healed. I wasn't suddenly bursting with wisdom or strength, but I was still here, still breathing, still capable of building something new from the ashes. That night, I wrote in a small notebook I'd picked up at the grocery store, something I hadn't done in years. I wrote things I wanted for myself, not for anyone else, just for me. I want a life that feels like mine again. I want to laugh without feeling guilty. I want to love someone who loves me back without conditions. I want to wake up grateful, not afraid. I want to be the kind of man who walks away when he's not valued and never apologizes for it. I set the notebook down beside the bed, climbed under the rough motel blanket, and let the future unfold itself in my mind like an unopened map. There would be wrong turns. There would be lonely nights. There would be days when I missed who I thought she was. But there would also be new mornings, new faces, new laughter that didn't come at the cost of my dignity. And maybe, just maybe, someday down the road, When the scars weren't so fresh, when my heart wasn't so cautious, I'd meet someone who didn't want to tame me, or fix me, or use me. Someone who saw the lighthouse for what it was, a beacon, not a burden. As I drifted into sleep, the last thing I thought wasn't about Rena. It was about me. It was about the man who finally realized that the love he was willing to give the world, steady, fierce, loyal, was the same love he deserved to receive. No more chasing. No more begging. Just living. Just breathing. Just becoming. And that, I realized with a quiet, tired, but deeply real smile, was a kind of forever worth fighting for.